Canada's burgeoning dictator, Justin Trudeau, has for a long time been a fan of authoritarian ways, as best demonstrated with the relatively recent crushing of the trucker protesters, who dared make their objections to Trudeau's COVID mandates known in a peaceful fashion. For their troubles, the leader of the truckers has now been in jail for over 100 days. Several others have been in jail for as long and longer, often because the Canadian police simply refuse to charge them with anything. Yet they still deny them bail, of course, and so can keep them locked up forever, pending charges. Unfortunately, however, whilst most of the mainstream media was all too happy to either not report on it or follow the official narrative, there were just too damn many people with cameras present. And so alleged police brutality turned into, we filmed that. And not to worry, by the way, the Canadian police confirmed that the horse was just fine. Nevertheless, again, there were far too many people with access to the internet around, and so Trudeau's ratings took a pounding, and in a snap election shortly thereafter, his party gained the lowest percentage of the popular vote in Canadian history for a party that would go on to form a government. A minority one, of course. Clearly, something had to be done, as there were far too many people spreading uncouth rumours about the great leader. And luckily, the tools for further Canadian oppression are just on the horizon, as Bill C-11, the Online Streaming Act, is on the way to the Canadian Senate for approval right now, after having been rushed through the House. This bill, itself an amendment to a previous bill, C-10, which died during the electoral upheaval of the snap elections, would place all online platforms, Switch, YouTube, etc., under the regulatory purview of the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, the largely independent and unelected regulatory body that holds the ball, gag and chain of all Canadian broadcasting companies and all foreign companies airing programming in Canada. Now, back in the good old days, it was very easy to enforce a national monopoly on the airways because, well, you're the only one with the broadcasting towers. This got a whole lot more difficult with the introduction of the internet. But never fear, modern freedom requires modern oppression. So, the CRTC will, according to the bill, be able to enforce their own algorithms and content prominence decisions onto the online platforms. Basically, they'll be able to go to them and say, hey, these are the rules now, and if you disagree, well, we're going to fine you $10 million for a first offense. In other words, this would mean that the CRTC would decide what YouTube would and would not show a Canadian user. The purpose of this is to promote Canadian content for Canadians, whilst maintaining traditional Canadian values like ethnic diversity and representation. Of course. And obviously, the CRTC would be the ones deciding how Canadian your content really is, and whether to push it or bury it. But hey, it's all well and good, right? Canadian content creators will just get a little extra boost from back home, right? No problems. No censorious ideas here, and mainstream Canadian media and regime-friendly sources would never get an unfair advantage. It's a neutral bill after all. And that is precisely why Trudeau's Liberals forced through a 7.5-hour deadline for the House to discuss and review all 170 amendments to the bill. Oh yeah, no partisan interests here, of course, and did I mention, by the way, that the current chair of the CRTC is an old-school industry veteran, a telecommunication veteran, one whose old job was literally lobbying for the interests of his employer in the institution he now runs? Again, I am sure independent content creators will receive fair and balanced treatment from their new overlords. And be sure that this will affect the content creators as well, by design in all due likelihood, as the Conservative Party tried to introduce an exception for independent content creators in the previous version of the bill, but this was voted down by the Liberals. Big quotation marks. And if by any chance the writing on the wall is not yet sufficiently brazen, then the impression of one Canadian YouTuber invited to speak about the bill might provide the finishing touches. As he made his little speech, he noted that the politicians are mostly busy watching cat videos on YouTube, presumably, as of course they knew full well they are going to fuck the content creator. It really is the slightly more civilized modern version of they victis, really. And for Canadian content creators, of course, this is going to be exactly what it sounds like. They are going to be shoveled way back to the end of the queue, where they will be quietly forgotten about forever and ever, in favor of authoritative news sources. Hey, Canada, if you'd simply waited a few years, I'm sure you too would have gotten around to pushing your news media as well. After all, the whole woo-flu thing saw an explosive growth in the popularity of mainstream media. Weird that, particularly seeing as they were the only ones allowed to report on it. And to be fair as well, this isn't the first country to do this. At the very least, in Canada, independent YouTubers won't be required to own a broadcasting license, so that's something, although they will be forced to sign up with the commission so that they, know who you are and how to find you. Oh, don't worry, I'm sure it's not as bad as it sounds, yet, anyways. And they will also force the online platforms to contribute to various Canadian broadcasting funds. In fact, one of the goals of the bill was to raise an additional 800 million Canadian dollars in revenue for the Canadian Media Fund, which is just brilliant as well. I wonder how the streaming platforms will react when Canada just goes like, hey, so, could we get you to pay like $200 million, please? Why? Well, just cause, we voted on it and we think you owe us a couple $100 million bucks. Fair and balanced, no doubt, I'm sure. And unfortunately, there's not really going to be much of an opportunity to do anything about this either, as the next Canadian elections are another 3 years or something? It's quite a while off, and, well, after the recent snap elections, in my opinion, Trudeau is sitting snug as a bug in a rug. Any and all investigations into potential abuse of power during the trucker protest is simply going to disappear. There's going to be a lot of noise made about it, or more correctly, there was a lot of noise created about it when the investigations were started, but you'll never hear about them again, and nothing will happen. Because any investigation of a political figure that lasts more than 2 weeks is probably pointless. I hope to be wrong on that, but I very much so doubt I am. The reason why I'm even bothering to talk about it here is, one, my next video on Ukraine and propaganda is taking a bit longer than I wanted it to, not quite getting the inspiration, honestly, and this is one of those topics which is a wonderful little advisory notice, a bit of a warning to people across the globe that we are going to see more and more government intervention into online platforms. Because, well, the online platforms themselves have been incredibly censorious and actively editorial in their approaches to how they present their content. And well, the very thing is, the moment a platform like that demonstrates that they are no longer an open, impartial platform, once they make it known that they have an editorial agenda, they lose all friends in the middle ground. And if anything, we just tend to celebrate when one of them gets smacked with an enormous fine or bill for being little shitty bastards, and for whenever the government decides to crack down on them and enforce their own rules and regulations, because, well, you did it first. you really can't now cry that a bigger bully has broken into your house and is about to steal your lunch money. Literally, in the case of the Canadian law, $800 million worth of lunch money. But at the same time, it is also a very valuable lesson to everyone else across the world that has governments that are thinking about their own legislation on online platforms. Namely, that whilst the government only might screw you over at the moment, and YouTube is actively screwing you over, you should still be keeping a very, 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 very wary eye on the petty tyrants in your government as well. Even now that the tides are beginning to turn a little bit because, well, both sides will probably become an issue at some point in this regard, in all due likelihood. Tragic though it might be. I might have to do a little bit of a talk on this article as well, though it's aging rapidly, but even after so many years of left-wing censorious bullshittery, the right, quote unquote, still just hasn't really learned the lesson. I'm beginning to wonder if it is simple human nature to want to oppress something. Perhaps we really are nothing more than bleating sheep. And on that depressing note, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.